Hello and welcome to African Perspective, the program that looks at stories on the continent. I'm Aldrin Simpier. Tonight on the show, we bring you updates on the climate change conference in Spain, the world and Africa, according to the EFF's Julius Malema. And as ZANU-PF goes to the conference tomorrow, we speak to a former Zimbabwean minister exiled here in South Africa. You can be part of the conversation by sending us your questions and comments to @AfricanPerspec1 on Twitter. But first, we start here. Climate activists grew impatient. And climate activists grew impatient today with the slow grind of negotiations in the United Nations Climate Conference, where countries are trying to cement the rules for hitting their targets under the Paris Climate Agreement. They say world leaders need to start looking at climate change as an emergency rather than a process. The United Nations General Secretary and Youth for Environment activist Greta Thunberg says the lack of urgency on the part of Western leaders to implement adaptation and mitigation mechanisms is not only harming the planet, but is also destroying lives. Our reporter Noma Bolani joins us live from Madrid, Spain for an update. Noma, let's start with that sentiment that was expressed earlier on. What exactly is it that you had to say?
Well, basically, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, as well as the youth activist Greta Thunberg, speaking to say that climate change is not just a process, it's an emergency. We're at a critical stage that if we don't step up efforts, the planet is going to suffer. And the people suffering the most are those in the global south, the likes of the people in the Caribbean, Southeast Asia, as well as Africa. A lot of the activists saying that, the mechanisms need to be put in place because it's not just about mitigating and reducing carbon, it's also about making sure that the global south is able to adapt to the extreme weather patterns.
They speak about, for instance, how Africa should be positioning itself.
Yes, I spoke to a number of scientists as well as activists who are saying that, maybe Africa should take this opportunity to fill the gap in terms of green energy. They're saying that, if they take the lead with renewable energy, they could be the leaders. To move from the space grey energy into green, because, it seems as if Africa has missed industrialization in terms of development, and they could develop the continent using safer energy, and therefore, they need to sit down and look at how exactly they can use some of the mechanisms that are supposed to be agreed to at this COP25 in Spain, how they can move into just transition in order to reach green, safer energy.
Quite an important conversation to have, which is currently taking place in the country as well, is the balance around the fossil fuel that the different countries have available, but then at the same time, how do you make sure that the economy still benefits from these fossil fuels while also mitigating the issues around the emissions? And the question then that comes up is the political will to move from grey to green.
Yes, political will is also a major topic here. We know that the likes of Africa have strong bilateral relations with the likes of China and Japan and even Russia, who are funding some of these fossil fuel projects in South Africa. So it's a question of, politicians sitting down to say, how are we going to strike the balance to maintain those bilateral relations so that they don't alienate those partners such as China while moving to renewable energy. We know and understand that the likes of Japan are building new power plants in Lephalale. It's called Thabameti. So it's about managing those relations, but also ensuring that, we have a just transition. You can't just shut down the coal mines because that means loss of jobs. And in a country like South Africa, where unemployment is so high, that's going to be a tragedy. So the ministers of environment, together with the Minister of Finance, as well as the Minister of Mineral Resources, kind of need to sit down to see what could be the plan to ensure that a just transition is made and that nobody is left behind.
Thank you so much, Noma Bolani. They're joining us from Madrid, where the climate change conference is currently underway. That's COP25. It's been 6 years since the Economic Freedom Fighters was launched, and this weekend the party will hold its second National People's Assembly. The spotlight is set to be on the top 6 leadership race and discussion policies that could inform its 2021 local government election strategy. While fairly new in the political arena, the EFF wants to position itself as an influential organization on the continent through foreign policy. Our foreign editor, Sophie Mukwena, spoke to the party leader, Julius Malema, ahead of this weekend's conference.
We have invited all the EFF organizations in different parts of the continent. We have Zimbabwean EFF, Malawi, Namibia, Ghana. All of those structures that have called themselves as EFF are invited. We have invited young, progressive ministers in different parts of the continent because of the relationship we had with them during our youth days, and many of them have shown interest to come.
Do you think the young ministers on the continent will attend your assembly?
Yeah, many of them have shown interest because we have built relations beyond political party affiliations. And we've continued to interact even when we are no longer in the former liberation movement. We've done the same with Cuba, Venezuela, Chile, China, the people we had contact with in the past. We have invited them. All embassies in South Africa and diplomats are invited, and majority of embassies that have shown interest, interestingly, is embassies outside the continent. But we thought maybe the ones in the continent, they are still struggling with African time. They will confirm much closer to the date of the registration.
Which countries, 1 or 2?
Well, I'm not able to do that, but that list can be provided. It is available. But yeah, they've shown a lot of interest, and they're not. Some of them are not even sending one; they're sending 2, 3 delegates to come. The worrying thing with the African high commissions and embassies is that it's a December time, so majority of them may be tempted to go on holidays and not be available. But we are in discussions with them.
Why do you feel strong that the EFF must profile its foreign policy?
Our issues are the same. In Africa, we were dispossessed of our land. Our economy is in the hands of foreigners who came and conquered our people in the continent. The anti-black racism is the same in the continent and even in the diaspora. And therefore, to think that you can wage a struggle of black people in isolation will be disingenuous. So, since we share similar problems and similar challenges, it will be important to inspire the continent about how we can go about the struggle for economic freedom.
What are the key issues that need special attention on the continent in particular?
The African unity. We want one Africa. We want a borderless Africa. We want Africans to compete with other continents at the same level. Because the reality is that you cannot have an impact in any world platforms as Swaziland alone. By virtue of the size of your population and the size of the land you have, no one will listen to you. But once we come together and we speak in one voice, as a United States of Africa, we will be able to negotiate working deals for the continent. The reason why nothing has worked for the continent is because we discuss in isolation and we're even prepared to sell each other out for as long as my small country can benefit from selling out these other countries. So we want the Pan-Africanism not to be only a theoretical question, but to be put into practice. It is those issues that will deal with xenophobia. It will those issues that will deal with hatred of one another. Because if we can't come together, we benefit the colonizers. They thrive out of the divisions they created in our continent. And the unity of our continent will lead to one parliament, will lead to one executive, will lead to one judiciary with biting teeth, where those who engage in human rights violation will be prosecuted and punished here in Africa. Those who undermine democratic institutions and want to overstay, even when their term of office have come to an end, can be subjected to some form of accountability here in Africa and not somewhere else where imperialist interests are being pursued.
Many are saying there's a risk for EFF to lose votes if the party continues with its stance on the issue of xenophobia.
Well, we must lose votes on principle because it's an EFF founding manifesto's principle that says we need a borderless continent. It's not my personal view. EFF was formed on those bases, and therefore to overlook this fundamental principle of the EFF will be pretentious and will be selling a dream to South Africans. If South Africans are going to elect us, they need to know that they are going to elect the people who are not going to see the people of Lesotho as Lesotho people, but as children of Africa who have the right to be here in South Africa the same way we have the right to be in Lesotho. We don't want Ghanaians fighting with Nigerians, the Angolans fighting with the Ghanaians, all those type of things. We don't want. We want us to be one, the same way Europe is doing it. Why can they do it in Europe and they don't allow us to do it here? I mean, once you've got the Schengen visa, you can go anywhere in Europe. But here, for you to just go nearby Mozambique or Lesotho or Swaziland or Namibia, it's a struggle. Yet, we're divided by even a non-existing fence in some parts of the borders. There's no fence, but we can't even cross and just go on the other side. It's practically, actually wrong to even think that we can't have relations when there's nothing that is stopping us. President Motlanthe once told us that in Free State, at the border of Free State and Lesotho, there is an area where there is no fence. The people go and have their drinks in Free State, and then in the afternoon they go back home. They are not regulated by anything. So what is the need for the border if people already have created a borderless society between South Africa and Lesotho? It means we as government were lagging behind. Our people are already leading. We must listen to what our people are saying. It is not true that our people hate foreigners. It is a group of opportunists and criminals who, if they can't find their way on a particular issue, they pretend like they've got hatred for foreigners. But the foreigners are not actually the main issue. They are frustrated by their own domestic politics of unemployment, of homelessness, of lack of service delivery. And then, because they are scared to confront the real culprits, they go and attack the weak, which are so-called foreigners in their own country, in their own continent. It must be stopped also, because when the foreigners fight finish, it's going to come to us. There will be, we don't need Shangans, we don't need vendors, we don't need Zulus, we don't need Xhosas. then it will be a tribal war. So it must be stopped even before it degenerates to that level. And if that is what is going to make me lose elections, when I prevent what is potentially something that is going to be tribalistic, then I've got no option but to lose votes if that is going to happen.
How is your party received on the continent? You are part of the Pan-African Parliament. You visited few countries on the continent recently.
Well, our party is received very well, and interestingly, even by heads of state, leaders of the former liberation movement don't see anything wrong with the EFF, actually engage it. Some of the presidents even tell President Ramaphosa, next time you come, you must bring the young man, because we want to have an engagement with him, want to pick his brain on this or that issue. I've never been to any country where there was hostility. We only experienced a problem in Botswana, which started during the time of the Youth League. It's not even about the EFF, and that attitude has since changed with the new leadership in Botswana. So the youth of the continent are so welcoming and are looking for the EFF to come and help them to establish structures that are similar to the EFF. In Nigeria, I can't walk the streets without being approached by ordinary people who recognize the contribution of the EFF. So anywhere in the continent, I'm at home. And if you go overseas, every brother and sister in USA, in Europe, in London, black people are receiving the EFF as their hope for a united black people.
Why African leaders want to engage with you?
It's our small secret with President Ramaphosa, because you know issues of diplomacy, they work differently. So there are many others actually who call the president and say they want to see me, and the president says, you're more than welcome. Sometimes the president himself tells me, hey, I was in this area, I think you need to find a way of going to talk to those people because they really want to engage with you. So when it comes to the continent, me and the president, we speak a lot, and we exchange notes, and we interact even with other leaders in the continent.
And then let's talk about the global balance of forces. Right now, it looks like the trade war between China and the US is likely to affect developing countries in particular. What's your view in connection with the trade war between China and the US?
Well, we don't think that it is an informed war which is waged by the US against China. We think that the Chinese must continue to be steadfast. They shouldn't compromise, because remember, this war is informed by protection of the economy of the USA, where the president of the USA wants to grow that economy at everybody's expense. Nothing else but the USA. So let's make America great again. So that policy of protecting that which is USA and then engaging in some form of rejection to everything that is not USA is what informs his attitude against China. But China has got nothing to worry about. I think the progressive forces all over the world have got a responsibility to come together and support China and put more emphasis on ensuring that America does not continue to be a bully in terms of the world economy. If you don't go their way, then you will never succeed. So we must support the Chinese economy, and China too must engage with developing countries with an interest of helping those countries to come out as being successful in their own right and not become a new form of colonialism that comes into developing countries to exploit them. So protectionism of USA as a policy is not going to work. We can't have that type of policy supported by our people.
There's a crisis in Zimbabwe. Have you taken time to engage with President Ramaphosa, as you've pointed out that as the leader of the opposition party in parliament, you do interact on issues you've just pointed out in terms of the feedback on issues of continental interest? Have you spoken to him about Zimbabwe? Zimbabwe is in a crisis.
Well, we have engagements, firstly with the president of Zimbabwe. We had engagements when he was starting his term of office that we hope that things can be done differently. And the first thing that needs to be done is to minimize the use of force to get their points across, and that they must allow political parties to have a right to organize and assemble and protest and raise their discomfort with the state without being harassed by the police. And that President Ramaphosa, we made the point to him that we need to help Zimbabwe. And that help should, amongst other things, include a bailout of some sort to Zimbabwe, because the problem of Zimbabwe, whether we like it or not, is a South African problem. When people say we don't want Zimbabweans here, it's inevitable if Zimbabwe can't stand on its own. The Zimbabweans are going to be left with no option but to come here. So we have to say to the Zimbabweans leadership, please, let's grow the economy, let's do away with corruption. Because to call for the sanctions to be lifted in Zimbabwe, and you don't call for action against corruption, even when the sanctions are lifted, the corruption will cripple that country. So there must be a clear anti-corruption stance by the leadership, and there must be the rule of law in Zimbabwe where the teeth of the judiciary to bite must be restored. Because in the absence of the judiciary, there won't be punishment for corruption. And when corruption is not punished, then you can be guaranteed there won't be a country. Zimbabwe will be a failed African state. So those issues have been raised both with President Mnangagwa and President Ramaphosa on how we can help Zimbabwe.
You visited the former First Lady in Zimbabwe, Grace Mugabe, and there are reports that Vice President Constantino Chiwenga also visited Grace Mugabe. What a coincidence.
One thing that many people don't know is that Chiwenga is the first cousin of Mama Grace Mugabe. So they are related, and that's why it was not difficult for him to become a general of the army under President Mugabe. So surely, if you put aside politics, he had to go and visit them immediately on his return. There is some level of intolerance of different views by the current regime in Zimbabwe. So if you hold a different view, you get isolated, and all types of name gets to be called, to discredit you and all of that. So I think that modern Zimbabwe, the first thing that you need to get right is the ZANU-PF finding a way to resolve its own internal affairs. Because we can't have comrade in exile being scared of comrades. It's not like a new party took over. Therefore, those who belong to a different party in the past right now will know. The comrades who supported President Mugabe and who saw things different from President Mnangagwa are somehow in the run. And can you imagine that happening here in South Africa when you hold a different view? You must somehow be arrested without trial and all. We can't have that. So ZANU-PF has to find a way of resolving its own internal affairs. Once there is tolerance of different views, then it's going to be very easy for people to work together. Ms. Mugabe has got no problem at all with the current arrangement. She has accepted that this is the leadership of the country, and she's more than willing to subject herself to that leadership. And she has got no intention, not in the immediate, to even contest them. And how she becomes a threat, I really do not know. So we remember when those things started, there was a rumor that she wants to become president and all of that. There are people who have not made peace with that type of a discussion, and as a result, they always see her as a threat. So I think President Mnangagwa is the one that must reach out. He's the president. He's the one that must be accessible. He's the one that must be willing to listen even to those who hate him the most. He is the one who must be willing to say to Moyo, what is the issue? Come sit down, I want to understand. What is your problem? And see if a solution cannot be found. I mean, if we did it after Polokwane in the ANC, where people thought after Polokwane there will be exile and killing of people and all those type of things, we survived and we're still here. And therefore, they can learn lessons from those experiences, that serious contestations can be held, where emotions are extremely high and there is even a threat to life. Yet people are able to come out of that situation and be able to rise above. When many people were agitated to go after President Mbeki and everything else that looked like President Mbeki, there were others who were with them, in government, who were saying, no, it's not going to happen like that. We can't proceed like this. Let's find one another. We're not enemies. I think if an honest discussion takes place, and perhaps even President Mbeki can play that role to facilitate that type of an engagement, they can learn a lot from Polokwane and Polokwane's outcome. Because it was a difficult and a painful process. But look at us now. The question Mnangagwa's regime should ask is, how did you navigate it through? I'm not saying this good relationship between President Mbeki and Jacob Zuma, but they were able to tolerate one another till to date, for the sake of the country and for the sake of the protocols of the former heads of state. So Grace Mugabe is the former first family, and there is a current first family in Zimbabwe. There should be a way of tolerating one another and supporting each other for the sake of the people of Zimbabwe and for the sake of the growth of Zimbabwe.
Alicia, how old are you?
I'm 10.
You are 10 and you're an author.
Yes. Well, my mom was the one who inspired me to write this book. Nothing is impossible.
Got him onto a 150, started racing, and within 8 months he was bringing home trophies.
Wow, that's incredible. You young man are going places.
It's one of the most cultivated regions in terms of content, and ndiyayivuyela kakhulu loo nto leyo.
And welcome back to African Perspective with me, Aldrin Simpi. And remember that you can be part of the conversations that are taking place by going onto Twitter and tweeting at AfricanSpec1, that is at AfricanSpec1, and also use the hashtag SABC News. You may have heard of the hashtag. Tyson Wabantu, the man behind the campaign, joins me this evening, and his eye is set on the Zimbabwean presidential seat. Former local government minister of the neighboring country, Xavier Kasukuwere, has been in exile here in South Africa since his former leader, Robert Mugabe, was deposed in 2017. He believes that young people in Zimbabwe are yearning for a fresh crop of leadership. Good evening and welcome back to African Perspective. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Let's start off here reflecting on what Julius Malema said earlier on about the state of Zimbabwe, but also saying that the president should be the one who actually reaches out.
Well, in any society, the president is the father of the nation. And if there are challenges, he must provide guidance and leadership to bring together people in the country. You'll be irresponsible if you don't see the need to bring about unity amongst your own people who you lead.
Has he ever reached out to you?
Not directly.
Not directly. How did he?
Well, I would say that at some point he makes statements which you might infer to say maybe this is about us, and that's it. Yeah.
Would you have read the statement that let bygones be bygones also as an attempt of reaching out?
But then he went further to say there are 3 people I will not forgive. Myself, Kasukuwere, Jonathan Moyo, and Patrick Joao. Now that complicates the situation. We welcome that statement when he said, let bygones be bygones. In other words, it's a call for unity in a country for us to be able to move together in spite of the challenges or differences. But then there is this particularization to say, the following people I won't forgive. And if this is being said by a head of state who's supposed to be the father of all of you, then you get worried that now, who will forgive who? Because once the head of state makes such a statement, it's a very, very difficult statement. In fact, they've gone further to classify us as enemies of the state, which again complicates the issues.
Is it divisive as well?
Well, it is. Yeah. It is. Because really, every politician will, without fail, have some support in a given country. People come from different regions. We all build the country because we all come also from families, we come from provinces and so forth. And you believe that as a nation, there should be leadership that brings all of us together, in spite of things that might have happened, but there must be that commitment to say, we are going to be moving in one direction. Just imagine what happened in South Africa, even in Zimbabwe. After independence, President Mandela, President Mugabe called for unity, called for reconciliation. That was much more difficult. You had a system that was designed to eliminate the black population and then stop them from assuming leadership of their country. But there was that ability to bring people together in the interest of progress and development.
And here you find yourself exiled?
Well, from my own country of birth.
And what does this mean for the people of Zimbabwe, at least those who are also behind the hashtag Tyson Wabantu?
Well, what it has meant, of course, it might look like it's a particular issue or personalized issue. But effectively, this is a view of society which is at pains of how best they can come together. Those who are raising issues around the Taisno Bantu, who are campaigning about it in the countryside, I guess it requires us to have that depth of understanding and say, what are the issues? The issues to do with rising unemployment in our nation, poverty, the division, the corruption, the lack of opportunity. Those in the diaspora who want to be back home, who cannot stomach or let alone fathom a situation where there are differences and divisions, where there is organized persecution to say, I want to deal with this person. That is something I think that really is of major concern to all of us, and this is something that we must tackle as the people of Zimbabwe.
Is it at all playing out in the party? And I'm asking this question as the party heads into its National People's Congress. Do you find, with people probably that you're still in contact with within ZANU-PF, that that's the sentiment as well within the party?
Because there's still characterization of certain members of the party that they are G40, or they have tendencies.
You were said to be part of the G40.
Exactly, and there are still those accusations against serving members of the party. You know, in other words, you still are fragmented. There's this factionalization existing. Even those of us who have been exiled or removed from the party are out of the system, but still within. If somebody is a different than somebody and perhaps is closer to certain characters in the party, they accuse the others of being G40. So it becomes again a fractured political movement, which unfortunately does not serve the major objective why the party was formed.
Do you see yourself back in the party?
I don't see any challenge. In other words, in the future, there is always a political direction that is in the interest of the country. It might not be in ZANU-PF directly, but it must all be about how do we move our country forward, how do we grow the challenges that are facing our people, how do we resolve them together?
Will that be born out of this campaign, hashtag Tyson Wabant, a new political vehicle?
This, I think, is a development that even caught me by surprise. These are citizens of our country, some in the diaspora, who felt that there is need to come together, to persuade each other and say, we need Kasukwere to come back into leadership. In fact, when I looked at myself as somebody who has been in exile, I thought we were right back in the dustbin. But the people have a different view. And I think something that one has to take a very deep look at and say, here's an opportunity.
But not using ZANU-PF as a vehicle?
Well, the movement, from what I understand from the founders, it is cutting across all the political parties. It is saying, how do we all come together as citizens of our country? And
even from the MDC?
MDC, ZANU-PF, various groups of people who have a view that the divisions in our country need to be healed at some point or other.
Some people say that why should Savior be considered to be the savior of Zimbabwe? Why should he be the person to be given that accolade, considering that some term your exile as a fugitive? This is somebody who is a fugitive of the law.
How do I become a fugitive of the law if I've been, if the charges have been quashed? I don't have any charge on me. I am away from my country because of
security
concerns.
Aren't you out on bail?
No.
I understand that you're out on bail.
No, I'm not on bail. Those charges were all quashed.
The charges were all quashed?
Yes. I'm a very free man. But the only challenge I have is I have to go back to a house which was sprayed by bullets, and no investigation has been done to this date.
But then when you speak about the enemy of the state, as you did earlier on, isn't that a criminal charge?
No. It's a very regular statement. It's not a criminal charge. How do you call somebody an enemy of the state? On what basis do you characterize a citizen as an enemy of the state?
Then
if I hold a different view from you, it doesn't make me an enemy of the country, unless you are saying you are the country as an individual.
Then on what basis aren't you going back home?
Well, I've said to you, security concerns. My house was attacked, and up to this day, there has been no investigation of what to say, yes, you are secure, you can come back home. There will be nothing that happens to you. And apart from that.
Yeah. Weren't the allegations that you actually helped the sister of Grace Mugabe to acquire a farm, and she was also subsequently then arrested and appeared in court and then out on bail as well?
No, her charges were withdrawn. I went to the High Court. I went through all the motions, all the way to the High Court, and those charges were quashed. In other words, if they have to start again, it's starting afresh. As I stand and as I sit before you, I'm an innocent man, free man.
And how do you respond to the Land Commission of Inquiry and the allegations? Well, the report coming out and saying that only 10% of the 3 billion rand that was supposed to go to the state coffers didn't go to the state coffers, and you are a former minister of the ministry that was the custodian of how that land was to be distributed.
I initiated the process. The Land Commission and the inquiry is as a result of the report I presented to Cabinet. We had observed the situation where land barons were taking advantage of the system, and I brought this up to His Excellency President Arajim Mugabe, and we took a decision as Cabinet to set up a commission of inquiry. And I'm sure those who are, if people are being honest, they will know that this was work underway. By the time President Mugabe stepped down and was removed, this process was already underway. We discovered that there were some glaring loopholes that were in existence in our state land system, and that we had to stop this. Individuals are not parceling out land, either as cooperatives, fleecing innocent citizens, and this had to be stopped. So basically, we're not worried in terms of the outcome, because this is what we sought to bring to fore, to say, what are the issues? Yeah,
I just want to quickly go back to this inquiry and some of its recommendations. Just before we get to the recommendations, some of its findings. It says, for instance, in an attempt to accelerate housing delivery, the Ministry of Local Government introduced a policy parallel to development, resulting in houses being built without adequate services such as roads, access to roads, the seas, and water and sewer reticulation. Don't you take any responsibility for that?
No, but this is exactly what I thought we were making a correction to. When we set up the Commission of Inquiry, it was to bring about these issues. You have situations, actually many situations, where people were even building on top of sewer lines, where people were selling land that did not belong to them. So we decided as a government to bring about order. And this was a collective decision by Cabinet.
Can you point to a project that you can say that under your ministry, this is how you rectified, or at least tried to rectify it, besides the inquiry itself? Well,
we have set up the Urban Development Corporation, UDCOP, which basically now has been charged with the responsibility of ensuring that it leads in the housing delivery program. Most of the urban land that we had as a state, we collapsed it into the Urban Development Corporation owned by the state, so there can be order and we stop residents or citizens losing their monies.
Okay. Final one on this particular issue is that the recommendation says there was a creation of a new settlements by aspiring or sitting members of parliament as a way of mobilizing political support. Do you agree to this?
Yes.
You do agree to that. Do you have names?
They're in the report. I don't have to
well, the full report hasn't been released. This is just a summary that has been released.
It would be responsible for me.
Yeah, but do you have names?
Names of people who were involved?
Yeah.
No, what I can say is that there was quite a number of aspiring politicians, councillors and members of parliament who took advantage of the situation.
Members of ZANU-PF?
Both political parties, I would say, ZANU-PF and MDC, yes.
ZANU-PF and MDC. Yeah. Okay, and this question then, some MDC supporters are saying that you are behind the 2008 violence.
How?
Well, that's the argument that they are making.
See,
and then this becomes then a debate around the credibility of this person who argues that he may just be the person who leads Zimbabwe into a new era.
There are reports that were done by the Human Rights Watch, and those reports are very clear. Those who were involved in those attacks on individuals are known. And surely, I just can't, because as one of the leaders, get blamed for everything that happened in the country. We take full responsibility at times and say, There are things that happen in our country which we should not have accepted or allowed to happen, but you can't just turn around and say, because it's Kasukuere, I must just throw mud at this guy and say he was responsible for this violence. No.
Who was responsible for the violence?
Well, there was violence in Zimbabwe. And I'm sure that the relevant institutions which have done the investigations have published several reports on who were involved, who were behind some of these heinous crimes. And the number of people have also been arrested and prosecuted.
Yeah.
In fact, it's something that must continue. If anybody was involved in violence, they must just pay the price.
Okay, I'm going to read a few of the tweets that we've received since we started having this conversation. Senator Joba saying, calling you a fugitive, as I did earlier on as well. He's a fugitive from justice, one of the most corrupt and ruthless ministers under Mugabe.
I know that man is Senator Staka, former Senator Staka from Tare.
Patrick, yeah.
Patrick Staka. Well, it's his view. He's a colleague, he's a respected colleague of mine, he's an engineer. I'm surprised he writes such things.
But during that period, serving under the leadership of Robert Mugabe, is there any responsibility or accountability that you take as having been part of that cabinet that led the country to where it finds itself, just ahead of Mugabe being deposed?
I think there is a misnomer here. Thinking that everything that Mugabe did as a leader is what led our nation into where it is. Let's accept there are some decisions, in fact, in the majority of cases, decisions that this government and government did take, which were in the interest of advancing our people. And I have in mind the land question, which is at the center for all these things. I mean, it had to be done. The core reason for our liberation struggle was the acquisition of our land. It therefore led to Britain and other countries getting angry and impose sanctions on Zimbabwe, which has also seen the closure of lines of credit and so forth. And of course, there were other issues there that we must maybe have handled differently.
Like what?
Issues to do with human rights, violations, issues to do with
violations.
I'm just saying to you, when you look at the total bill of the issues that we're talking about, there are issues as a cabinet that we might have had to look at differently. But by the way, I only joined the cabinet 2008, 2009. So most of the things that would have happened in the past did happen. And President Mugabe was the first one even to accept that certain things have happened that happened wrongly. But let's come together. And this is when the GNU was formed with the MDC, and people moved together forward.
Quick one, what do you think the president of South Africa can do to help assist the country?
I think we can't ignore the situation in Zimbabwe. President Ramaphosa is a dear brother and senior leader in the region. The situation in Zimbabwe requires attention. Look at the number of people who have left the country, who are either in South Africa, who certainly would have loved to be back home, either working. We need to restore the Zimbabwean economy, but it requires us to have a frank discussion with each other. There has to be that agreement that you can't have a neighbor behaving in a manner that also ends up affecting the neighboring state.
Save Kasukuera, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That is Save Kasukuera, former minister under the leadership of former President Robert Mugabe and now exiled here in South Africa. Newly crowned Miss Universe, Zozibini Tunzi is setting into her new role as Miss Universe 2019. She arrived in New York yesterday, where she'll be based for the next year. Tunzi beat 89 other contestants to become the third South African to win the coveted crown. Tunzi gave her first set of interviews yesterday. SABC's correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease was one of the first to be granted an interview.
Take us through the moment, right? I remember Steve Harvey announces your name, your hands go up to your face, you're shaking a little bit. Talk us through that moment.
I mean, it's so unbelievable because you are standing with another woman who also has an incredible story to tell, who's also very intelligent and beautiful. And in that moment, you're thinking it could go either way. It could be any of us. And so when they said my name, it was absolutely fantastic for it to be happening. And it was an out-of-body experience because I do nod my head because I'm in actual disbelief that, you know, this is happening. But
your answers were so strong. I remember the question on climate change. South African Twitter was saying they're trying to trip her up. And then, of course, you followed that up with the response on leadership for girls and owning the space and cementing yourself in the space. That answer has resonated with the likes of Oprah Winfrey, with Naomi Campbell. Naomi Campbell just tweeted something, and I think there are 2 million views of your response. What's the reaction been like for you? How are you managing this new attention?
Yeah, I'm so happy that, you know, powerful women picked it up, because I think awareness and the louder we scream out a message, you know, the more it gets out to the people. And I'm so happy that they were able to pick it up, because we do need these leadership skills in women and in young girls moving forward into the future, because we do need that confidence to know that, you know, we're also capable of leading. And yeah, it was... it's still mind-blowing to me that women like Oprah and Naomi Campbell and Michelle Obama as well would pick it up and go with it.
It's a response really that resonated. Is that going to be the focus of your year-long reign? I know you have a history in sort of working and being an activist in terms of gender-based violence. What will your focus be, given the platform that is now afforded you?
Yeah, you know, there's so much to do this year, and I cannot wait to get into it. I'm sure there'll be a lot of other new projects that I'll be working on, that I'll be introduced to. But whatever it is that I do, I want to make sure that it's purposeful work, because there's nothing important to me than making sure that I'm doing purposeful work and work that actually touches people's lives.
And tell you what, she's already touched people's lives. Again, congratulations. Thank you so much for watching African Perspective with me, Aldrin St. Pierre. We're back again next week, 9 o'clock, same time, same place here on the SABC News channel. Goodbye, and thank you so much for your contributions to the show. Enjoy the rest of the evening.